Welcome to my patron request video for the month of February. For the uninitiated, my highest tier patrons get to submit requests to me once a month, and each month I pick a video topic out of one of these requests. The requests that don't get picked don't get ignored, however. There's honestly a lot more patrons in my highest reward tier than I ever really expected, so the number of requests is a little nuts, but all the requests I don't do go on a list of videos I will for sure make sometime in the future. So with that out of the way, let's get going with the video. There are a ton of game soundtracks out there that prioritize creating a vibe or mood over a traditionally strong melody or harmonic structure. And while this is very cool, it's something that I find a little tricky to talk about in an analytical sense. These tunes tend to be much more interesting on a textural level or a sound level than on a compositional level, as a lot of work goes into actually making the sounds themselves, and I'm not much of an audio engineer. That being said, today I want to talk about a game that manages to marry the vibe of more ambient soundtracks with some pretty cool harmonic ideas. That game is Transistor, as requested by patron Zachary Neely. Thanks, Zach! Specifically, I want to talk about a very old technique that the composer for Transistor, Darren Korb, uses in some pretty new and interesting ways. That would be pedal points. Simply put, a pedal point is a note that sustains for longer than the chords moving around it. Most of the time, this means that one note will be present in every chord in a progression, even if it doesn't fit nicely into all of these chords. Most commonly, you'll see bass pedals, where the bass voice in a song sticks on one note while the chords change over top. This has been used fairly frequently in classical and jazz music, usually as either a tonic pedal, where the chords change around the root note, or a dominant pedal where the fifth is played in the bass to ramp up tension. An example of this is Transistor's height map. This opening section actually uses two pedal points. We get the bass and the middle guitar voice both pedaling the tonic G throughout the first 16 bars of the tune. The other two guitar voices slide around chromatically, implying a progression that I interpret like this. I say interpret because while pedal points are a part of each chord, the pedaled note is clearly identifiable as its own thing, so it doesn't necessarily contribute to any chord's quality, and with only two notes to go off, the harmony gets a little bit ambiguous. This sort of ambiguity could be disorientating, but having a pedal point, especially a bass pedal, is a great tool for keeping a piece of music sensical, even as the harmony makes no real sense on its own. Instead of having one note pedaled, Korb often uses what I like to call a pedaled voicing. This is a chord voicing or part of a chord voicing that stays consistent throughout an entire progression, even as the moving bass and any other voices recontextualize the same voicing as several different chords. Take signals. Each chord uses the same A sus2 voicing over a different bass note, turning what would otherwise be a very typical and poppy progression into something much more colorful and less straightforward.
Step out beyond the edge and start the motion. Look out below. I know there's no decision.
This idea can be taken another step further by taking these pedaled chord voicings and arpeggiating them. The Transistor soundtrack is often very sparse, with heavily reverbed guitars and breakbeat drum loops filling out the space left by disregarding a more formal melody, chords, bass type of structure. On Vanishing Point, we see the same three notes pedaled in a sense over a chromatically descending bass line. This gives us some really interesting and weird chords if you try and analyze it in a more traditional way. You get an F minor flat 6, E 13 sharp 5 but with no 7, E flat 13 sus, a D diminished with both a flat 7 and a natural 7, D flat major 7, and C sharp 5 flat 9. They don't really make any sense, and you'd never normally be exposed to this weird of a chord progression in a soundtrack like this. But the structure of the descending bass line over the pedaled arpeggio allows us to make enough sense of it not to be turned off by the dissonance. It's worth noting at this point that this is definitely stretching the traditional definition of a pedal point and moving more into the realm of a similar musical idea, the ostinato. An ostinato is a musical figure that consistently repeats throughout a musical section or even an entire piece. You might be thinking, well, what's the difference between an arpeggiated pedaled chord voicing and an ostinato? And it's definitely a blurry line, especially considering that a pedaled arpeggiated chord voicing is a phenomenon that I just sort of made up. But the difference is that an ostinato doesn't have to reflect any sort of chord voicing. In fact, it can be entirely rhythmic or maybe melodic. Even a drum beat can be considered an ostinato in some sense. Check out Old Friends, where the guitar plays the same 4-note ostinato over a changing bass line. Again, an otherwise pretty straightforward and pop progression is made much more interesting through this repeated ostinato figure. Another great example of an ostinato is in the song Gateless. This E7 sus arpeggio is the perfect tool to use in this way because sus chords are already ambiguous by nature, so they fit easily over a ton of different bass notes without losing the intriguing sense of harmonic ambiguity. Remember that A sus2 chord back in Signals? The A section gives us what basically works out to be this progression. In the B section, the roles flip, with the bass giving us a 9/8 note long ostinato while the guitar plays its long tremolo melody over top. Adding to the intensity of this section is the polyrhythmic relationship between the 5/4 melody and the 9/8 bass line. Well, that's the video. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment or tweet me at 8-Bit Music Theory. If you're interested in making video requests or in any of the other rewards I offer to my patrons, such as early access to videos and copies of all the transcriptions I make for each video, consider checking out my Patreon page. Thanks again to Zachary Neely for the request, and I'll see you all next time.